There are 32 technology levels in EU4, and it's time to rank them in the only objective way possible, a tier list. As always, we're considering the utility for both single player and multiplayer, and to make this tier list not unnecessarily large, we'll be combining each technology tier into a level. So we aren't ranking the military technology tiers or anything on their own, just the combined level as a whole. We're taking into consideration as many things as possible here, including things indirectly hidden by the technology, such as vulnerable nations in either Admin Tech 10 or Admin Tech 18. I will also be considering things like universities unlocking certain missions that give certain powerful buffs. So for example, taking a technology that unlocks universities so that you're able to complete a mission that gives you a certain bonus is an indirect buff of a technology that unlocks universities. I'm also going to be assuming that if you're considering the value of the technology at all, you're already late enough into the campaign to have the technology available. And as such, an argument such as Tech 32 is bad because I finished my runs in 1445 does diminish the overall value of the bonuses indeed. However, this is an argument similar to saying that Silk is a bad trade good because I only play as France, and hence because I never get Silk is terrible. This doesn't mean that Silk is inherently terrible because they never get to play as France, it just means that for you it's not part of the rankings. Meaning that if we are including a tech such as 32 as part of the rankings, we have to assume that it is on the cards and on the table. Now, I am clarifying this in advance, as this is a prevalent comment I get for videos that cover anything in EU4 that occurs past 1550. With all that said, that's certainly enough disclaimers for the day, but before we start, a like on it would be appreciated if you haven't already, and a subscription would be amazing. Let's begin with Technology Level 0. A technology level so amazing, it's not even on the list. It does technically provide absolutely nothing for the admin levels. In fact, admin levels 0, 1, and 2 do absolutely nothing. However, the early techs for diplomacy and mil are actually quite filled up, kind of. So Tech 0 gives a massive bonus to morale of armies and morale of navies, as well as giving you some colonial range and giving some base infantry fire and shock. And I think the keyword here is base, because technically Tech 0 provides an infinite amount of morale and navies as a percentage increase over what we had before, because you go from 0 morale of armies to 2. The good news is, with technology level 0 and I guess technology level 1 as well, is that this is the base value. And we immediately run into the issue technology level 1 that every single country in the game has Tech 1. So the bonuses it provides, at admin nothing, at dip the ability to place merchants, giving you some trade range and global settlers, as well as the ability at military level 1 to build castles, give some infantry shock and get some infantry fire. It's very hard to rank it relatively, because it's free and built in. Now, if you are playing by some miracle a mod which sets you to Tech level 0, which you can do, I'm just not sure why you would need to take Admin Tech 1, Mil Tech 1, and Dip Tech 1. And if you would, let's evaluate the values of those bonuses. The ability to place merchants is really, really good. Let's just be absolutely clear about that. And the trade range lets you actually place said merchants, so I'll include that as the bonuses for level 1. Regarding the mill bonuses, the ability to build castles is really, really good. It also means that if you're trying to siege someone that has a castle and you don't have mill tech 1, you're going to take terrible debuffs for the siege in progress, because they're going to have advanced fortifications that you haven't unlocked. So basically it's going to suck if you don't have Tech 1 by some miracle. I'm not sure how you managed to unlearn technology level 1, I mean even Native Americans have it, but there you go. Medieval military, merchants and trade and feudal monarchy. No, sorry, advanced tribes, that's a Tech 1 bonus. This is going to be an A-tier buff simply because of the ability of unlocking forts and being able to use merchants. Now again, it's a bit of a weird ranking since it just comes with existing, you're always going to be Tech 1, regardless of what nation you're playing. But with that, we move on to Tech 2. So, for Tech 2 on admin, we gain, yet again, absolutely nothing as we unlock Feudal Monarchy. This is a subtle nod by Paradox to demonstrate that the Feudal Monarchy innovation innovated absolutely nothing and added nothing to society. Regarding level 2 Dip technology, we gain access to the Bark, giving you more trade range and 20 naval engagement width, which is a good thing because at the moment your naval engagement width is practically 0. I think it quite literally is 0 without Tech 2, so you now can boat fight, which is fascinating because it does mean that Tech 1 boats can arrive at the battle but also be too big to fit in a battle. Fascinating. Anyway, so that part is quite important, and at Tech 2 you gain 5 combat width and a whole bunch of infantry shock and cavalry shock. Given the base values of infantry shock and infantry fire, and cavalry shock has like 0.8 at this point, the 0.2 cavalry shock is quite a significant increase. We're basically looking at 25% buff to the cavalry shock values, and the infantry shock values go from 0.3 to 0.5, so we're looking at a massive 40% increase to the shock of your infantry. Basically, the mil value of Tech 2 is actually quite significant as well. It's a very big jump militarily. The naval buff unlocks basically every single boat. Your cogs, your galleys, your barks are all unlocked here, apart from the heavy ship, which will come in a second. You get naval engagement with, so you can actually fight now. And the trade range goes from 100, which basically lets you send your merchant to your capital area, if you're lucky. Actually lets you maybe send your merchant out to a couple more areas. So Tech 2 is actually quite a big jump, and also a second member of the A team. With that, moving on to Tech 3. Now, Medieval Administration gives you the first actual ability from the admin group, giving you 2 production efficiency. Excellent, thank you. The good news is at least most countries start with it unless you're a NATO. I would say, however, that the relatively pathetic impact of admin tech 3 means that while admin techs in general are very important, admin tech 3 is quite ignorable. The same I won't say about dip tech 3, giving you access to a whole bunch of colonial range, 2% trade efficiency, global settlers, the ability to build flagships, as well as the heavy ship technology, and the 0.1 morale of navies buff. It's a small morale of navies buff for sure, but it comes with a whole bunch of other neat stuff, so definitely can't knock tech 3. And regarding the military department, we get the ability to drill, which is unlocked at tech 3, as well as 0.5 morale of armies, which is again a pretty massive buff at this point, as you're going from 2 morale of armies to 2.5 morale of armies. So yeah, tech 3 is big and important, and this is literally the tech that separates Native Americans and Africans from the Europeans and the Indians and the Asians, basically. This is quite a significant tech, and there's no two ways beat around it. The 0.5 morale on its own is quite a big jump. The morale of navies, the ability to build heavy ships and all those things are all great. And the production efficiency for admin, I mean, it's something, but it's not great. It also comes with the ability to support rebels, but you shouldn't be doing that, so I mean, I guess it's worth a mention. Anyway, Tech 3, mainly due to the morale of armies, is going to be going into A tier as well. We have a lot of early A tiers, but a lot of the early techs are quite important. And then we move to Tech 4. This gives you the ability to build temples, and with the changes to how temples work now, more specifically with the government reform to give temple rights to get 33% extra taxes on them, as well as the ability to get the clergy reform for minus 5% dev costs on temples, I think temples are significantly stronger than they used to be. They used to be decent for scaling, and you certainly do still delete them late game now, but they are an excellent way if you have money to invest into the future of your country, have a decent payoff rate, and are just a good building to build. I can't say the same thing about marketplaces, but I guess you do need the permission sometimes, and the trade range is 10. It's not really going to be noticeable. There are very, very few times, and by very few times I mean in the thousands of hours I've played of this game, I've never noticed 10 trade range make a difference. I've never had a situation where I take Tech 4 and realize, oh, now I can send my merchant to somewhere I couldn't send it before. So that part is quite sad. But that's still a thing, and marketplaces are a building. You have to respect that. As for Miltech 4, that's Pike Square, and is going to be the big first jump that you pick up in the game. Rushing Tech 4 to gain an advantage is a classic for many strategies, and can pretty much mitigate differences such as the Ottoman quality. The 0.25 military tactics means that you can fight even something like 10 discipline down against equal opponents, because the military tactics will, for the most part, even that out. And the 0.5 morale of armies makes you go from 2.5 morale to 3 morale, which is again a very significant jump. Tech 4 is really, really big in this case. Temples are great for scaling. Marketplaces are, well, an option that you need to build, and don't even hold back the technology, and Tech 4 is huge and massive for early game fighting, and that means that Tech 4 deserves nothing but the S tier. And with that, we move on to Tech 5. Giving you first national idea slot, this is how you customize your countries, and I'm going to tell you, both in single player and multiplayer, I value national ideas. In multiplayer, national ideas are how you know your country's doing well, and how you fill them out to survive, and in single player, national ideas is how you utilize your vision. If your vision for your country is some colonial mastermind, you better start taking your colonial ideas. If you want to go conquer the world, you better start taking admin, dip, and espionage if you're in the HRE, or whatever else floats your fancy. Idea group unlocks are very valuable, and this is quite literally the first one, arriving in 1466, if you go by the intended time zone. The Tech 5 for Navy, though, gives you some trade efficiency, coastal defenses, so congratulations, the AI can now waste their money, as well as a bit more extra trade range. And Miltech 5 gives you new units sometimes, a pretty decent increase to supply limit, although I find this early in the campaign, you're not struggling with supply limit as much as you would be later, so while this is a nice bonus, armies by this point of the game tend to not be big enough to be really using up that much of the supply limit, and if you are a nation such as Ming, where you are in a situation where day one you're already using up the supply limit, you can just separate your armies out, so it's not that big of a deal. But the infantry shock and the cavalry shock buffs are nice. You get new units sometimes depending on your tech group, and a lot of the time a lot of people do get new units. I mean, Western people get new units, a whole bunch of Africans get new units, so I do believe, but do correct me if I'm wrong, I also think the Americans get new units at Tech 5, but yeah, Tech 5 does have new units and has its decent value. However, it's still not as big of a jump as significant other things in terms of the military technology level. What is carrying Tech 5 though is the unlock of the new ideas, and if it wasn't for the ideas, it would be struggling to be in B tier, to be honest, compared to the value of the other techs, but the unlock of your first idea set makes Tech 5 a very easy top of A tier. I think unfortunately just below S tier. But with that, we move on to Tech 6. Workshops, farm estates, and ramparts are now available. Ramparts are beautiful and should be built. As a matter of fact, they can now be built on rough terrain. That change was reverted, meaning they're excellent now, especially if you shove a rampart on a mountain. Just a great defensive measure to build, and brings you a lot of value. Workshops are amazing for scaling, and even farm estates, if you have the money early, are a good thing to throw your money towards. I know people like to build farm estates as well as the manpower manufactory, but hey, you can also do both if you expand infrastructure. Farm estates, unlocking them is never a bad thing. With Tech 6, you move on to docks. Docks may not be useful, but the ability to steal maps certainly is, and one of the things that I find weirdly useful with docks is a decent chunk of Paradox missions, and even modded missions, require you to build docks to proceed with certain mission tree elements. You unlock them relatively early enough, and so you can now build them to complete certain missions, and I think that's a surprisingly decent amount of value you can unlock with that. And on Tech 6, you get Tech 6. Tech 6 gives you the single biggest military quality jump in the game. I believe technically there may be a later tech that gives +1 morale, somewhere around 15-16, that gives a bigger jump as well. But at that point, I think it's Tech 15 actually from the top of my head, but we'll see it when we get there. Tech 6 is early enough where you can certainly rush it, and if you have Tech 6 fighting against someone like Tech 5, even if they have 10 discipline on you, you're still going to absolutely dominate them. Tech 6 is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, military jumps in the campaign at all. Go for it. It also comes with new cavalry for a lot of nations. So, yeah, it's just great. In terms of military quality, it's very hard to rival it. The workshops are amazing. The ability to steal maps is incredibly useful. Docks even unlock new missions. Tech 6 is another entry into the S tier. So we had a lot of really good technologies now, and we're not going to be slowing down, as Tech 7 gives you access to your second idea slot, letting you fill out even more of your national ideas. Tech 7 also gives you a lot of colonial range, meaning that if you're colonizing, Tech 7 is probably where you're going to be able to start colonizing outside of the Central Islands. I mean, if you're Portugal, you'll probably be able to grab a couple colonies on Tenerife or something, but Tech 7 is when you can actually start reaching some of the provinces in New World. And Tech 7 militarily does not disappoint, coming after a massive buff of Tech 6. Tech 7 gives you some actual artillery fire and artillery shock pips, meaning artillery goes from being entirely useless to being only mildly useless. It is still bad, as well as a massive 0.25 mil tactics again. If you're fighting Tech 7 against Tech 5, you're going to be slaughtering the enemy. This is a pretty massive mil tactics difference. Don't underestimate Tech 6s and 7, they're one of the bigger flips you're going to get in the early game. Especially since you have to bear in mind that by Tech 7, people have just unlocked their second idea slot, they certainly haven't filled out their first idea slot. So if you're fighting someone, they're not going to probably have a lot of discipline lying around. Even a lot of countries that have discipline in their ideas tend to have it near the end of their ideas, so you certainly haven't unlocked it by now. Well, that means that does really increase the value of Tech 7, basically, to such an extent that Tech 7, I think, with the second idea slot coming in, the colonial range for the colonizers, and even the impression officers, if you really want to build those, I don't think I've ever seen anyone go, yeah, I can build impression officers. I don't think there's any missions that also require them either, now that I'm thinking about it. But yes, even despite the uselessness of impression officers, Tech 7 takes a spot in the S tier. And with that, we move on to Tech 8. You get your first GovCap buffs from this. You get a flat 100%, 100 GovCap, not 100%, I wish you got 100%, and you now get courthouses, so if you want to throw money at the GovCap problem, you now can. You get some more trade range on the dip levels and some more morale of navies, great, as well as shipyards. Now shipyards are also involved within certain mission trees, so that's actually a nice part. And you get an extra max promoted culture. The Dip Tech 8 is actually a very nice Dip Tech for that max promoted culture. A lot of the time by Dip Tech 8 you probably have a culture you want to promote. This is around the 1500s at this point, so even in multiplayer you've probably expanded to the position where you probably have someone else you want to promote. As for the Miltech, this now gives you regimental camps. Now, Tech 8 means that even if you are the greatest scaler of all time, unless you're playing someone like Lübeck and you have 3 provinces and 8,000 ducats, you're probably not rich enough to build regimental camps everywhere now, or frankly anywhere, so I think this is a bit of an early unlock, but it's still there and it's still a valuable building, as well as giving you more infantry fire and cavalry shock. The buffs to the infantry fire and cavalry shock are decent. The shipyards and the max promoted culture also make this technology quite good, and the courthouse and governing cap is something you absolutely can't complain about at all. Overall, though, a lot of other techs provide more significant bonuses, but I think the ability to get the max promoted culture, get the GovCap going, and regimental camps, especially in multiplayer, mean that this is going to be a tier as well. Again, a lot of the early techs are going to be very important, and so we've had a lot of really high rankings so on. So far. Now, to be clear, if we're looking at single-player regimental camps aren't that crucial, so if this was a purely single-player ranking, we'll certainly be looking at somewhere between B and C tier, probably still B tier, but in multiplayer regimental camps are incredibly important, and hence that's kind of just dragging it into the A tier for me. With that, though, we move on to Tech 9. At Admin Tech 9, you get 2% production efficiency. Yay. Now, Dip Tech 9 is neat to get some more colonial range, meaning that at this point, if you are struggling with it, you can get some more colonial range. However, if you're playing someone like Portugal or even England that's colonizing, you've either probably grabbed Iceland at this point or Greenland, so you have the colonial range to get to from your other colony, or you've already grabbed the colonial range like buffs to get across. So either you've colonized across or you've already gotten across by Tech 9 if you're colonizing it by this point. That is my experience of it. You get upgraded boats for what it's worth, and at Mil Tech 9, you get some more mil tactics in combat with. Tech 9 for military is basically the thing that's keeping this technology relatively relevant. You also get new infantry for most nations, as well as that increase in combat width. Professional officers really should be a more significant technology increase, but I guess it's the effect of this technology later that'll be amplified, not the actual technology at the moment of implementation. The admin tech is really dragging this bit behind though. The colonial range I find less useful, but it's still neat. And I guess I also have to mention that you do unlock the ability to study technology at this point with your spies, which is neat and can provide you a bonus if you're behind to catch up, but I don't find it to be that useful in practice. Mostly because I forget to do it, to be clear. It's not due to it not being a nice modifier. You should absolutely study technology. I just, a lot of the time, don't bother. Overall, though, it is Tech 9, the military technology, that's keeping Tech 9 relevant, but at the end of the day now, the mil tactics have fallen off with Tech 6 and 7 coming in, so the 0.25 increase isn't that massive. It's mostly the new infantry, and a bunch of nations don't actually get new infantry at Tech 9. Well, I mean, so Western techs certainly do get new infantry, the Ottomans get new infantry and so on, but not every nation gets it. So that's a bit of a downer for it as well. It's not that big of a jump, even though numerically it's the same jump. It's not that big of a jump as Tech 6 and 7 was. So I think it's a very solid B tier, but I can't really put it on top of the others. I'm sorry. And with that, moving on to Tech 10, the technology that unlocks basically every other formables and lets you unlock your third idea slot. Third idea slot is great because it also lets you finish your national ideas as well at this point. So nothing's stopping you having the full effect of your national ideas unless you're playing a mod that changes how much progress you gain. So extended timeline, for example, decreases the progress towards your national ideas based upon, well, the amount of ideas unlocked. So you would need to fill out like 10 idea groups to fill out your national ideas, for example. So yeah, unless you're playing something like Extended Timeline, Admin Tech 10 lets you finish your ideas, which is really valuable. The Dip Tech is a bit more disappointing, giving you some trade efficiency in Global Settlers. The Global Settlers is nice, that's for certain, but the trade efficiency 2% I don't value much at all. As for Miltech 10, it's one of the sadder ones. I mean, it's nice for specifically Western technology groups, as Western technology groups don't get a cavalry update until Tech 10, so it's still the same cavalry until Tech 10 that they would from Tech 1. So if you're Western, it's actually a neat buff to cavalry. However, if you're not using cavalry, or you're using cavalry you're not Western, this tech really doesn't do too much. Improved flanking range is a weird one, because I find that it's not that hard to fill up combat with these days with your armies, especially when you're fighting by the 1530s. Like, you're gonna very rarely be fighting people that have like 15k up against your 30k at this point. And if you are, you probably have 100k, so you're gonna win anyway. So something like improved flanking range, which means that if you're flanking, you can flank with more people, is going to be significantly less useful than people think it is. So it's a very weird bonus. But it is nice on bonuses, ironically enough, on things like artillery, because artillery does sometimes run into situations where the guys in front of it have died, so it wants to actually shoot someone to the left or the right of them, and this is where the improved flanking range can kind of shine. Again, you also do pick up new infantry from it, so it's not that big of a downer. Regardless though, Tech 10 does give you the third idea slot, which is very valuable. It lets you form a lot of powerful nations, and the admin technology level of this is certainly carrying this technology up into the S tiers. It's basically dragging everyone else combined with it, and the new cavalry for Western tech groups means it's not even the worst milk tech to pick up out of there. I'm sorry, the ability to finish your ideas and form a nation is just way too powerful to pass up. And with that though, we move on to Tech 11. Textile manufacturers are really, really good. You get naval equipment manufacturers at Dip Tech 11 as well, and you now get weapon manufacturers. This is the economy tech, and this is a really beautiful economy tech. Comes with some even more colonial range. At this point, if you are struggling with colonial range, you're not, because you picked up like 300 from tech at this point, so that's also an issue you can consider fixed. You get some more infantry shock and cavalry fire buffs, which is neat, although cavalry fire is kind of whatever, to be honest, especially by 1544, as 1544 is about the time I'd say you probably want to be phasing out cavalry unless you're doing a cavalry build, and the combat width is something. It's neat, can't complain. For me though, Tech 11 is a massive technology for unlocking scaling abilities, and even in single player, Tech 11 is when you can probably be in a position you can actually afford a lot of these menus, and they're good menus to build, so this is an excellent technology, and yet again, another entry into the A tier. Now we move on to Tech 12. More GovCap, State houses, it's a beautiful tech, really can't complain. The dip tech version of it is a bit sadder. Slandering merchants is something you do to BM in multiplayer, otherwise it's pretty irrelevant. Naval engagement widths is neat and the morale of navies is nice, but who actually fights navally? Not many people. And Miltech 12 gives you more mil tactics, so that's a nice buff. It gives you a supply limit, and by 1550s, this is when you probably want to be starting to actually use the supply limit, so I do tend to appreciate the Tech 12 supply limit. It's kind of ironic how many games I've had where I would be sitting around the 1550s and I would be in a situation where I'm like, could already use some more supply limit at this point, and then I'd get Tech 12 and I'm like, oh, this is pretty neat. So I actually value that quite nicely, and you do get a bunch of new units for a bunch of countries, Western as well included, since I know most of you guys are playing European nations. So in that part, it's pretty neat. The ability to fight significantly more navally is nice, and again, you get naval batteries, so if you're playing a game with AI, this is where they're going to start spamming naval batteries and wasting all their money, so that's neat. The state houses, though, and the gov cap are really big parts of this as well, so that's a very neat bonus to have too. Definitely can comment that. So yes, so Tech 12 is another entry into the A tier, nothing too incredible to stand out to S tier, but another excellent technology. You can really see a trend here as well, we'll say. With that, moving on to Tech 13. Yay, I get production efficiency. Yay, I get trade efficiency. And yay, I get artillery buffs. Now, Tech 13 militarily is a really weird one, because yes, you unlock new artillery. However, until Tech 16, I still don't think it's worth running artillery. So this makes the artillery less bad, but they're still bad. Now, very technically, it is worth running artillery because artillery gives you half of its pip towards the front row. So if you're in a situation where you have enough money and you have enough men, you should be running artillery. It is strictly better to have artillery than to not have artillery. But in many practical situations, I tend to prefer to have another reinforcement stack of infantry and cavalry than I would to have a backup artillery in the battle by around Tech 13. Of course, artillery still works for sieging, but Tech 13 doesn't make artillery siege better, it just gives it more artillery fire and shock, as well as giving you new artillery. So nice, it makes a unit that's useless for fighting, well not useless, but I would say 20% useful for fighting, become 30% or 40% useful for fighting, but doesn't make it good still, so it's not really worth to go full send on the artillery and make sure you have artillery into all your battles by Tech 13. So it's not really practically useful in that sense, it's just one of the techs you pick up. But what's absolutely sad is the admin and dip tech offerings. 2% trade efficiency, production efficiency is the most whatever modifier I've seen on this planet. And as a person that's been frequently subjected to the Rise of Kingdom ads or whatever the hell they're, whatever kind of weird mobile game that we're trying to sell these days, it suddenly tends to remind me of those weird ads that says, yes, I need to pick Egypt for their 2% harvesting bonus. Like, come on guys, I'm a paradox modifier stacking person. Like 2% is a sad modifier for me. Give me at least like 20% harvesting bonus. And what kind of brag is that? Yes, I can harvest 2% better. That's just kind of sad, really. That's me giving slightly less of, slightly less of a quiet quit during my employment. Oh no, I'm working 2% harder. It sounds like an insult, and that's kind of how I see the 2% trade efficiency and production efficiency. Like, have you ever noticed an economic impact from taking Tech 13? Now, if you are behind on technology and you take Tech 13 ahead of time, yes, you will notice because it gives you 20 production efficiency ahead of time. But have you ever been behind on technology, taken Tech 13 and gone, yes, I've got Tech 13. The 2% production efficiency has saved me. Yes, I've got Tech 13 dip. The 2% trade efficiency has saved me. No, it's a pretty irrelevant modifier. 10% trade efficiency is noticeable, sure, but 2%? You need 5 of those to be noticeable on the radar, so yeah. Anyway, this is a massive amount of cope for a technology that frankly does not deserve this much attention, and for that reason is going to be our first entry into the D tier. If you're behind on Tech 13, frankly this is the best tech to be behind on. But it does have an issue because Tech 14 is quite nice, giving you the 4th idea slot, a bit of a diminished value at this point, as by the 4th idea slot at this point, a decent chunk of the game has gone by, so you have already experienced a bunch of the game without the modifier bonuses of the 4th idea slot, so you can't really retroactively use an idea slot. I can't say that I would unlock espionage ideas in 1600s, and hence I would have AE reduction, so don't coalition me, Mr. Austria. I would have AE reduction, doesn't quite work that way. As for the dip technology levels, you can now build trade stations. That's actually a good manufacturing, gives you promoted cultures. So in essence, it's still a nice bonus as you now get plantations, which is a good economic building. You get the idea slot, which is neat, and you get the max promoted cultures and trade stations. And on Tech 14, you get bastions, you get infantry fire, you get more combat widths, you get new infantry and cavalry for a bunch of people. Tech 14 is a big one. It's frankly a contender for S tier, to be honest, but I think that one of the main issues with it is by Tech 14, you're already into 1600, so even if you're playing to 1821, which a lot of the time you're not, it's kind of a bit late for manufacturers to really get their return on money issue, because, okay, nice, you built them, but if you built them 50 years earlier, you could have had them for 50 years making you money, so it's a bit sadder on that sense, but it's still nice, and I think it's important to say that if you are behind on money, or you want to upgrade forts, or you want to have stronger infantry, you should absolutely be taking it. The max promoted culture is also really nice to pick up from here. It's very useful by this point especially. It's just a very nice technology level all around, and an excellent entry into the A tier. I'd probably put it, I'd say, above Tech 1. And with that, we move on to Tech 15. This is the part where you can now Force March, so yeah. I think Force March is surprisingly underused in single player. It should be used more often, and I guess part of the issue with that is that a lot of the time you don't need it for micro, but it can be useful for getting out of certain situations or catching AI stacks that would otherwise slip past you. Just bear in mind that if you have Force March on, you're burning a mill point for every province moved, and you're not recovering morale or reinforcing your units while they are Force Marching, so make sure to turn that off if you want the recovery to happen. Tech 15 gives you more colonial range, which at this point is more of an insult, and global settler increase. In 1596, yeah, I'm not gonna lie, basically most things are colonized by 1596. By 1596, you're racing to colonize random islands in the Pacific that Spain didn't get to yet. I mean, colonization in this game is way too fast, and as part of that, that's meant that new colonial nations like Japan that have to pop up, Paradox has to give them even more overpowered colonization buffs inside their ideas to let them keep up with Europeans, and this has kind of meant a situation where Victoria 2, where Africa is uncolonized by the Scramble of Africa period, just doesn't happen. Every province that's conceivably colonizable is colonizable by like the 1600s. You get the ability to sabotage recruitment. This is actually useful multiplayer, so that's neat. But yeah, the Tech 15 isn't great on its own. If you're fighting navally, it does give you a pretty big naval buff increase. Galleons are a big jump up from the previous heavy ship, and early frigates are, frankly, whatever. You shouldn't be fighting with light ships. But of course, we have to talk about the big boy in the room, Tech 15. 0.25 mil tactics and a whole point of morale. Now, it's been a while since the last point of morale. In fact, it's been since Tech 4. So this +1 point of morale is absolutely massive. If you're in single player and you have a big, massive Ottomans, Tech 15, while they're on Tech 14, is an excellent time to fight them, and same for basically any other enemy. Tech 15 is, I think, a contender for Tech 6, depending on your tech group and so on, for the biggest army jump in the game, and having it happen this late is actually quite useful, because at this point, if you need an army jump, it's usually for an enemy that's quite big, and Tech 15 arrives at an excellent time to say, hey, take me early and absolutely crush the enemies of your state. This is a massive mil tech, and for that reason alone, if this was a mil tech ranking, it would be straight into S tier. It's kind of held back a bit, my Tech 15 being very meh. I guess sabotage recruitment is nice, so if this was a dip tech ranking alone, it'll be a C ranking. As for the admin part, soldiers' households are great, and force marching is neat as well, and I guess I should have mentioned the soldiers' households, which, by the way, I think soldiers' house should be part of the Miltech 15. I know I'm kind of over-buffing Miltech as well, but it's kind of weird for an administration to build a purely military building. Like, barracks aren't unlocked by admin tech. It's a Miltech innovation. You don't unlock docks with admin or mill. I think soldiers' households should be a military technology building, but it really doesn't matter. It's just a weird finicky thing, and I'll be honest, it's something I absolutely can mod. I just won't, because who actually cares? But yeah, soldiers' households are good, especially even in single player. If you're really struggling with manpower, it's something you can spam, put down, and get free manpower from. Multiplayer, they're amazing and should be built. And so, for me, it is an incredibly strong contender for Tech 15 for S tier, and I'm certainly seeing it, but I'm also moving an army towards A tier as well. The reason I'm moving an army towards A tier is that Tech 15 could be technically better for the dip range, but at the same time, I'll be honest, the morale jump is way too massive compared to the previous ones, and the soldiers' households are simply too good in multiplayer and even offer decent utility in single player. I think, despite my own reservations, Tech 15 does deserve a stride, just barely scraping into the S tier today. And with that, we move on to Tech 16. Mills, great, we get incredibly good manufactories in the 1600s. Well, if you want to get economic hegemon, this is the way to go for it. Spam your mills now, get your good manufactories. The mills tend to be the best menus in the game, so for that reason, that's pretty neat. But overall, it's quite late, and the 2 production efficiency is an insult. Diptech 16 is more of an insult. 20 trade range at this point is whatever. If you need trade range, just colonize or take the province you need in the area. I don't think I've ever struggled with trade range by Tech 16. In fact, it's outside of extended timeline, I've never struggled with trade range full stop, because usually if I want to be trading in a province, I usually own land near the area. So yeah, that's never been an issue for me really. And the trade efficiency yet again is another whatever. But Tech 16 gives you artillery fire +1, artillery shock 0.1, and training fields. Training fields are amazing, and Tech 16 is when cannons are actually good again. So Tech 16 is when you should start shoving cannons into everything. This is where, if you haven't made the transition to having artillery in your army, you should be doing it by now. And this is such a massive military shift. Like, quite literally, we can separate EU4 into a fighting with pre-cannons to fighting with post-cannons category. It is that big of a difference. And Tech 16 is when cannons go from being, I guess, decent but still not good to, yeah, you should actually run cannons. And from this point on, cannons only keep widening the gap between them and infantry and cavalry in terms of their utility and value. Even cavalry-only builds, so builds that build entirely around cavalry, should be running cannons by this point as well, because you want them. They're just that good. Training fields are great. Even in single player, you've pop these guys down, great for manpower. Mills are great for just having enough money overall. I mean, I know I said they get there late, but at the end of the day, money is always nice, and if you think that you have too much money, just go over Force Limit, is the ironic answer there. You're soon going to realize you don't have enough money, because Force Limit can be just a number, but hey, Mill Hegemon is also a place, and that's the place you want to get to, especially in single player. And in multiplayer, you're never going to have enough money. You want to be building mills, so just all around, Tech 16 is a big one. And so Tech 16 is another technology. We're going straight into the S tier. We seem to be very generous with the rankings today, but the fact of the matter is technology kind of matters. And with that, we move on to Tech 17. 10 admin efficiency, gov cap, dev cost modifier, universities, so a whole bunch of other things unlocked. Trade depots are whatever on Diptech, trade ranges whatever, colonial ranges whatever. Diptech 17 is the most whatever technology I could possibly conceive of. So that really doesn't matter. But it's a Miltech that's also quite neat. You get supply limit. Admin is the one that's carrying big here. Supply limit is also neat to pick up, because by the Tech 17, which is usually the 1600s, you're starting to enter the 1600s, because you tend to take this one early. So I'll say you definitely take it before 1622. And this is the part where your armies are starting to hit the 30-40k marks, and the supply limit 50% is definitely going to help you a lot here, especially if you haven't taken quantity for supply limit buffs. The cavalry shock is also nice, but at this point you've usually gotten out of cavalry. But if you're running cavalry, the +1 cavalry shock is a really nice modifier, so that part is really nice. The fact of the matter is, though, Tech 17, the admin efficiency, the 250 gov cap, the unis basically on their own skyrocket this yet again into the S tier. Technology is good, is all I will say. And on Tech 18, you get your 5th idea slot. Nice. You get the ability to sow discontent, which is more of the AI giving you an ability to get -2 unrest if they really hate you. You get some morale of navies, which is neat, and some naval engagement width, so if you're doing naval fighting, this is a nice tech. And on Tech 18, you get improved flanking range and combat width, as well as a bunch of new infantry and cannons and cavalry, as well as new artillery. So that part is neat. And Tech 18 is a very workhorse tech, but it's nothing too special. At this point, idea groups, the 5th idea group is nice, but you're only going to have it for another 200 years if you can immediately finish the idea group and you play until 1821. Both of those aren't usually things that are happening, so it's there. But even in the best case scenario, you're having the buffs on the 5th idea group for only half the game, so that's going to knock us down its value, but it's still nice. I mean, idea groups are strong. You get your naval engagements and morale of armies, which is neat. Morale of navies, sorry, for the naval stuff, which again is neat, but really whatever. The sow discontent, I find, is something that the AI tends to use on you, and something that you use to troll other people in multiplayer, and it doesn't matter that much. And the mill tech is possible. Like, it's nice enough to get an advantage, but it's nothing too absolutely insane. So we have yet another just workhorse tech going into B tier. Although I say yet another, we actually haven't had many workhorse techs. We have just good techs. And unfortunately, we have no exception coming forward for cathedrals at Tech 19. That, ironically enough, unlocks a bunch of missions, because a surprising amount of them need cathedrals as a gatekeep. Although I say that may be just a bunch of mods. I'm mostly thinking about Ampenon. Now that I think about it, not that many actually need cathedrals within vanilla these days. War galleons are whatever. The colonial range 50% is basically an insult by the 1650s, because if there isn't a province that's been colonized, it's probably one that you've entirely surrounded as a player. The dry docks is whatever, because even if you are doing a naval game by this point, you don't need dry docks to win. The war galleons and frigates are a big upgrade, and the main thing from Tech 19 is going to be the mill tech. The Starford upgrade is nice, although at this point the AI is also going to be taking it, and sieging level 6 forts gets annoying. So for me, I kind of knock that down in single player, absolutely. The mill tactics, though, is good, although at this point, again, it's Tech 19. You've gotten a whole bunch of mill tactics bugs from before, so the 025 is relatively less of an impact. The actual nice thing with Tech 19 is even more supply limit. I find with Tech 19 is the part where you can kind of run 40k per province without attrition in most places. Assuming you have around 20 dev on those provinces, by Tech 19, you can basically run it everywhere. And if you've taken quantity, you can absolutely run it basically everywhere, even without the prerequisite development. So that part is quite nice, but I'm going to have to rate the military tactics buff from this point as quite worse. So, and cathedrals they're not great. There's a reason most multiplayer buffs buff cathedrals, so I'll be putting it to B tier as well. Now then, we move on to Tech 20. GovCap is actually quite nice at this point. It gives you 250 of it, and that I have to rate. You also pick up naval professionalism, which is a very weird way of saying +1 max promoted cultures, because 2% trade efficiency and 20 trade range is an absolute insult. I think the 20 trade range just exists to pad out ideas, to be honest. Well, pad out the technologies. And Killing Grounds is nice. You also get new artillery, which is a nice buff, because again, artillery is good now, and a better artillery is a better army. And infantry fire is also a nice thing to pick up, and that's for certain. Combat width also increases. But the main thing of it is again, another nice workhorse tech. The GovCap is always useful, but it's not going to revolutionize the way you play the game. The max promoted cultures is also nice, but it doesn't revolutionize the way you play the game, and that's kind of a continuous theme for Tech 20 at this point. It's just neat, especially this late of the game. We're in the 1650s now, that's for certain. So for me, that's another B-level tech. And now we move on to Tech 21. This technically unlocks furnaces. You're not building furnaces for another 40 years, because yes, you can now research them, but you need enlightenment. And you've normally tech in this, I mean, the game does say 1674, but at this point you've probably stacked a bunch of tech buffs and you have monarch points lying around. You can definitely take this like 10 years early at a minimum. So, okay, well, I say at a minimum, you shouldn't be taking it tech years early, but I've seen this taken in like 1670s. Not that you should, but you can. And when you do, great. You actually just get 2 production efficiencies. The university just placed here because they can be. Tech 21 lets you sabotage reputation. This is entirely useless. And also gives you a new light ship. A new transport, sorry. That is entirely useless. And Miltech 21 gives you Mill Tactics Infantry Shock. Again, the Mill Tactics are nice. It makes it passable as a tech, and it's still a neat enough bonus, but we're really late. As you probably noticed, there's a lot of things giving you Mill Tactics at this point, so the relative increase from these Mill Tactics is significantly lower. Because the main thing with Mill Tactics you're looking at is the ratio of your Mill Tactics to the enemy. So having 2 Mill Tactics versus an enemy's 1 Mill Tactics is significantly better than having 10 mil tactics against an enemy's 8 mil tactics, even though the flat difference is significantly bigger of 8 versus 10 compared to having 2 versus 1. So again, the mil tactics by this point, it's nice, but it's only going to be enough to disqualify from the D tier. It's just not enough to even qualify with the other big techs. Infantry Shock also is just not really a build. I don't think I've seen, outside of mods, an Infantry Shock country build. Like, it's not really a thing that happens. With that though, we move on to Tech 22. You get the 6 idea slot at this point. That's neat, and that's certainly a nice thing to have, but really, it's going to be around the 1680s at this point. By the time you're finishing the ideas, certainly 1680s, 1690s. Base case scenario, you're going to have the effect of these ideas for 100 years, and that's if you play into 1821, and let me tell you, a lot of the time you're not, so that's certainly a reduced value. For Dip Tech 22, you get naval attrition no longer applying at sea, which is a great quality of life, but beyond that, it's not the most useful. You can now build stock exchanges, so you unlock a couple missions, but nothing too major. You get some morale of navies, which is again neat, but again, that implies navies matter, and they don't. And some naval engagement, neat. Nothing, again, that's worth really talking about. Tech 22, though, kind of makes up for that. 2 artillery fire is absolutely massive. The artillery shock buff is also a neat. You get new artillery as well, which is even more great. And if you're running a cavalry nation, you do get new cavalry. More specifically, if you're running Poland as a cavalry nation, because you get the Wind Hussars tech at this point, and the Wind Hussars are a very nice cavalry to get into. Poland Tech 22 is basically peak Poland cavalry if you can build around cavalry as Poland. So for Poland, it's a very nice tech. For everyone else, it lets you build conscription centers and makes your cannon significantly better. The Miltech part of this is significantly carrying. The town halls as well for the admin are nice. It is very much a workhorse tech, and the thing that we also have to, I think, recognize though with town halls is town halls plus the other GovCap manufactory, the State House, is basically how you full state the world. So for that, I have to commend town halls to be at least somewhat useful for those super late game builds. But the dip tech is very relevant, I find. It's just the mill tech and the relative utility of the admin tech that are keeping this, but it is certainly going to be enough to put this into, I think, the bottom of A tier as a technology group. 22 is quite nice. The big part of this, of course, is still the mill tech buffs, because the artillery fire bonuses are very nice. Anyway, we move on to Tech 23, Measure the World. 1700s, you're about to enter the Age of Imperialism, which is what Dip Tech 23 does, and the military buffs are whatever. But anyway, 10% admin efficiency, absolutely beautiful. We love Tech 23. Even in single player, even in multiplayer, the dev cost modifier is absolutely amazing, coming from the Measure the World as well. Basically, you want to measure the world, and you want to measure it inside of your country, because you want to make everyone part of your country at Miltech 23. And you're able to do that with Diptech 23. Imperialism and nationalism are absolutely amazing casus belli. Like, I cannot stress enough just how amazing these two casus belli are. 1700s and unlocking Tech 23 is basically when the game says, alright, you can go have fun now, and go have fun you shall. It tends to give you a bit of an insult by giving you an extra 150 colonial range. Like, anything's been left uncolonized by this point. No, it hasn't. The last colony finished in 1650. So, yeah, that's just completely pointless, to be honest. And hey, if you do manage to uncolonize a province, you'll be able to settle it fast with 25 global settlers. Great. Also, if you're planning to fight with light ships, which you shouldn't, you can now make them into heavy frigates. Amazing. The mill tactics from Tech 23 are also neat, but they're just the cherry on top here, as well as the new infantry and the cavalry shock. Again, if you're running a cavalry army, that part is certainly neat, but yeah. Again, Poland Tech 23, oof, it's a big cap tech. But no, the main thing is the dev cost modifier is amazing, the admin efficiency is amazing, and imperialism and nationalism make Tech 23 the big tech to go for. Basically, if you're playing the slate, Tech 23 is where you want to be at. And so that's going to be the top of S tier for sure. And with that, though, we move on to Tech 24. Counting houses and GovCap are nice, but counting houses are great. Okay, I think there's the main problem with counting houses, they're not unlocked earlier. I think it's the issue, really. It's going to be like 17 tech when you get them. Like, great. Even if you build them, you're only going to have 50 extra years of money. And the thing is with counting houses, especially, is that if you are building money for something like Economic Hegemon, you can definitely get it by admin tech 16 and just building the good menus. Like, you don't need counting houses. That's one of the big problems with counting houses, especially, is like, they are really good. And if you're in a situation where you need money, counting houses are amazing. My problem is that a lot of the time you don't need money. With that said, though, from an objective reality, counting houses are great, and the 250 gov cap is good. You now get the ability to corrupt officials. Show of hands, has anyone ever corrupted officials, apart from the ability to go get the achievement on Steam to corrupt officials? Because I think I got the achievement on Steam, for corrupting officials, or I think I was messing around and found the button and pressed it once just to see what it did, and was disappointed when it did nothing too relevant. It is one of the most irrelevant spy actions possible, so yeah. It has no real impact on the AI because they seem to run on 2 corruption anyway, and against the player it's like, oh wow, I have 0.1 or power cost or something for a bit, oh no. The micro that took you to build that spy network and press the button has diminished your ability to play the game more than that extra corruption that you gave to the other player has affected. It is quite genuinely irrelevant. The trade efficiency 2% is an insult, but at least the engagement is neat. And Tech 24, though, it does have a bit of a negative soft spot in my life. It lets you build level 8 forts. Level 8 forts are miserable. I hate sieging level 8 forts, and the fact that this technology unlocks them is a bit depressing to me, because this is the part where AI will now also build level 8 forts. So with Tech 24 here, you better stack siege ability, and you better make sure you're running 50 quintillion cannons, because you're going to have a miserable time with level 8 forts. That's all I will say. Now, that does mean that level 8 forts are good, which means that technically I have to rank it highly, even if it's good at annoying me, which is an unfortunate reality we have to live in, but yeah, that's Tech 24 for you. The mill tactics at this point make it relevant, but not amazing. And I think that's a very good way of summarizing Tech 24. It's relevant. The naval engagement with is relative navally. The counting houses and GovCap is relevant administratively, but it's something too major. And Miltech 8 forts aren't going to save your campaign if it's 1715. and you're losing, you're not going to start winning because you built a level 8-4. And those 0.25 mil tactics, if you're going to lose a war, are very rare to make that much of a difference. But it's just one of your very much workhorse techs, and hence an excellent entry into the B tier. And with that, we move on to Tech 25. Yay, 2% production efficiency. Please see my earlier comments on why that's irrelevant. Another thing that's pretty irrelevant is 0.5 morale of navies, because it's a naval buff, as is a 3-decker. The 3-decker is actually a big upgrade navally, if only it mattered, because it doesn't. The only thing that's keeping Tech 25 relevant is the massive militarily buff from Royal Mortars. +2 artillery fire is absolutely massive, as is 0.5 artillery shock, as well as unlocking your artillery. Tech 25 is basically carrying the entire relevance of Tech 25, and is carrying it way out into the C tier, into the high A tiers if we were in, well, multiplayer and you're still fighting by this point, but certainly an entry into the B tier with multiplayer considered. I'd put it nearer the top, but again, the rankings between the tiers don't matter that much. With that said, though, we move on to Tech 26, which at admin level gives you the 7th idea slot. By this point, by the time you fill it out, it's going to be around 1750, I would say. If you've really stacked idea costs, you can probably pull it off by the 1740s. But yeah, it's going to give you at best like 80 years of use. And this is if you've optimized to make sure it gives you 80 years of use. If you're playing quite casually, you're probably going to be finishing this by around the 1750s, 1760s. So you have 50 years to use your 7th idea slot. Enjoy. It's not going to do much. Regarding the Tech 26, the max motor cultures is the neat part there. The global settlers and colonial range is straight up an insult at this point. I mean, it's 1750. You're going to have to go back 200 years to go find something to colonize. And Tech 26 is the Miltech that is another big jump. Now, Tech 26 exists in a weird space where it is a big Miltech jump, but my issue is with Tech 26 is that it's so late in the game that any AI or player that is left have enough mil points to basically take this like 70 years ahead of time. So there's no way for you as a player to time it to also take this ahead of time to be able to use it against an AI timing wise. You're all just going to have this. This does mean that if you don't have it, you're going to be punished still, and plus morale is enough of a punishment, especially with new infantry, new cavalry. But it does mean that I found the ability to actually utilize the big jump of Miltech 26 significantly harder than the ability to utilize big jumps such as Tech 15, Tech 4, Tech 6, and Tech 7. Like, there are many cases where you AI enemies or even player enemies will not have the mil points to take Tech 4, Tech 6, Tech 7, or Tech 15. But by Tech 26, if your AI enemies or your AI, or your, well, not AI players are still around in the game, they're going to be printing like 15 mil points a month. They're going to be able to take Tech 26 without much of an issue. So it's less of a big tech to abuse in terms of its jump potential. However, the idea slots are nice. The max promoter culture is still useful. So I think even with those, even with those critiques, we have to still admit that the morale of armies +1 is a big jump, as is the new infantry. So it is certainly going to the top of B tier, but I can't be ranking it any higher, I'm afraid. And with that, we move on to Tech 27. Admin efficiency, gov cap, and dev cost, my beloved. You love to see it. You also get the ability to agitate for liberty, which does absolutely nothing, so you may as well gain nothing as some morale of navies. And you get more spy limit and infantry fire. I actually do still value spy limit. It's a nice quality of life modifier. The infantry fire is neat, but this is entirely carried by the admin efficiency and dev cost modifier, as well as the gov cap. Now, I've seen a decent chunk of campaigns finish between this point. I mean, I've certainly finished World Conquest before Tech 27, so this is not strictly speaking necessary. But it's still a nice bonus to have, and it's an excellent closer to the game if you're going for a World Conquest buff, or go dev to your heart's content if you're still playing multiplayer by this point. Although I have to admit, multiplayer games, to get to the 1700s, that's considered a pretty late game. I am yet to really see any multiplayer game that's serious get past 1710, where it kind of matters in a competitive environment. I've seen multiplayer games get to 1821, I've played in a couple, but those were chill games or co-op games with friends. So in those cases, we went through because we were playing Ambanal trying to finish a massive mission tree or something. Like, you don't play a competitive multiplayer past 1700s because by around the 1700s, everything's decided and the game usually ends. So assessing the military value of 0.5 infantry fire or even the multiplayer value of the dev cost modifier is quite bad. Another thing to mention is the dev cost modifier really falls off for single player use at this point, because you're usually not deving institutions as much as you would be earlier. Like, I still think you're deving institutions by Tech 23 sometimes if you're in the wrong part of the world. However, by Tech 27, you've kind of conquered most places, and even if you do need to dev an institution, you're deving like 2 of them. It's tops. That's assuming you're deving the 1751. Sorry, you're deving one of them, the 1751, and you kind of need the 1751 for Tech 27, so even that little utility has fallen off, so it's really quite a sad one at this point. It still has the admin efficiency, and that makes it go into the A tier, but I just don't think it's quite the S tier tech compared to the other options available by this point. It's just too late in the game for it. Now, of course, the admin efficiency is still great, and the gov cap is useful, and if you're trying to close off a game, it's very useful, which is why it's top of A tier, but it's just not as amazing as some of the previous jumps that can be utilized. With that, moving on to Tech 28. They ran out of things to put into the tech tree by this point, that's a promise. 0.5 infantry shock by Tech 28 is completely irrelevant. You get new infantry and new cavalry, which is neat, but if you're not Western, you don't even get new infantry. So if you're playing a non-Western tech group, Tech 28 militarily is really pathetic. Tech 28 diplomatically does absolutely goddamn nothing. 2% trade efficiency is again irrelevant, as is 28 at production efficiency. Tech 28 is a glorified joke. Yeah, it really does not do much. That's worth talking about too much. So yeah, it's another entry into the D tier. I'm sorry, Tech 28. You're quite sad. And with that, we move on to Tech 29. You get the last idea slot. That's neat. I rate that. You get 0.5 morale of navies. I don't care. And you get new artillery. Yay. Well, artillery by this point is still a nice buff. If you are by some miracle still playing multiplayer in 1780, first of all, I commend you. Second of all, enjoy artillery, but you now get to enjoy your peak artillery modifiers until Tech 32, but you've got the best artillery units itself. That's neat. The ace idea slot is nice, but you better fill it out quickly because the game's going to end in like 20 minutes, so yeah, make sure you got that going. It's hard to get excited for Tech 29, but I think it's the fact that the idea slot is there that I think makes it eke out into the B slot. Ideas are still quite powerful, and with the ace idea slot, you by definition finish your build, and I think there's also a decent chunk of closure from finishing your build. With that though, we move on to production efficiency from Admin Tech 30. Div Tech 30, which gives the ability to trade efficiency, and unironically one of the most useful spy abilities, Infiltrate Administration, gives you the ability to see where the enemy armies are. If only this was unlocked in 1805, this would be really useful. This would actually make spying a lot better. This would be unironically a massive buff to espionage ideas. This is one of the things Paradox wants. Don't give me a really useful ability and a really useful unlock in 1805. I consider the game of EU4 ended in 1800s, which gives me 20 years to finish something off if I've messed up my timing. So an ability that's inherently unlocked in 1805 is also inherently useless. Thank you, Paradox. As is the trade efficiency. Now, technically, this tech group isn't bad. Why? Because plus one morale of armies is an absolutely massive bonus even this late, and the mill tactics are just a little cherry on top. Of course, at this point, there's loads of mill tactics going around, so it's not that incredible, but still useful. And hey, if you are making your builds, this is also closure for you to pick up your last of the infantry upgrades. This is actually the last tech upgrade for most units at Tech 30. Western tech groups get it, even a bunch of, I think Native Americans get tech, new infantry here as well, as do the Indians. So yeah, a bunch of big important countries get their final infantry at this point unlocked, so they can enjoy that. And the fact that you do get the new infantry, I think, as well as the morale of armies, means that it's worth it to put into C tier, but I'm honestly debating D tier at this point. It's just way too late in the game. Now then, you get revolutionary ideas. It's a revolutionary idea that the technology is unlocked in 1820 for a game that ends in 1821, which is really poetic. So you're basically kind of taking this ahead of time as by default. You also get a max promoted culture. Usually you finished your one culture like 50 years ago, but I guess it's still nice. And from an inherent buff point of view, infantry fire is nice, cavalry shock is nice. The Tech 31 invention of the rifle, as well as the Tech 32 foot howitzer, getting a bit ahead of ourselves, is basically where you'd hit peak military strength. Just the part of the small issue at that point, the game's kind of over. So if you're going for a world conquest by this point, you're usually at the point where you don't need the military strength, and you're usually at the point where you have enough manpower where you can just go over supply limit without caring. So the mil-tech buffs aren't enough. And if you're in a situation where you need a plus 1 cav shock to beat an enemy, you're probably in a situation where they're too big to be annexed anyway, so you've probably already screwed up by this point, because you're not going to annex them in one war. The 500 gov cap is nice if you really want to finish off stating the word, I guess, but at this point it's pretty redundant because it's just so late in the game. So for me, it's another one of those techs that's just, it does too little, frankly too late. I mean, 500 gov cap and the actual Tech 31 bonuses would be amazing, but the game is quite literally over, so yeah, we're going to have to be ranking this quite a bit lower. If, however, you're playing with something like Extended Timeline and you play to carry on past 1821, this is a big tech, don't get me wrong. Max Motor Cultures is nice, the Gov Cap lets you have fun with the game as it were, and the supply limit bonuses are quite neat at this point as well, especially because you're fighting with a lot of other stacks, so the bonuses there are still worth it. I guess what I'm trying to say is, if you're intending to play past the end date, it's actually a good tech. And I think here we have this disagreement. And the reason I made this entire disclaimer is that because I'm actually going to be putting Tech 31 for the buffs provided into the high B tier, even when we're taking into account the fact that this quite late into the game, because the actual bonuses provided are still quite nice. Although, again, I've gone into excruciating detail, while even though those bonuses are nice, you can't use them. And never else is this more evident than Tech 32. 2% production efficiency is an insult by this point. It is basically the game saying, we've run out of things to give you, screw off. At Tech 32 for dip, you get 2% trade efficiency and 50 global settlers. Thanks, we finished colonizing it 250 years ago. But the main thing, though, is field houses, giving you the biggest buff to artillery. Tech 32 artillery makes any kind of other military build that isn't artillery fire and fire-based artillery pretty relevant. The good news is, in 10 years, every other build is also relevant, so that's good to see as well in that sense. It really falls off in the sense that the game is quite literally over. But if you do intend to play further, this is a really good tech, purely based on the military technologies, and it will be another entry into the B tier, because in terms of the actual pure buffs, the plus artillery fire is quite massive and enough to warrant a high B tier ranking. However, if we are valuing based upon its impact on the game, pretty much nothing, so let's just bear that in mind. The reason Tech 32 isn't B tier is because the actual bonuses provided are quite nice, not because of its insane impact on your actual game. The game is over. Anyway, that is all I have time for today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to my channel members, especially Ark, Soda, Selemon, W Haste, Sebastian Haller, Channel Dog 2.0, Nick Haas, Duck Fortuna, Big Salad, Leb Josh, Gay Fug, Clockwork Norse, and Golden Arrows.